Hello everybody and welcome to the second session of this course. In this session we're going to be talking about staffing the international organization. And I will start by defining what the goal of a staffing the international organization is. And the goal is hiring and placing people in positions where they can perform effectively. I repeat, hiring and placing people in positions where they can perform effectively. If you pay attention to this sentence, it's basically saying that you have to hire the right person for the right position. Because if you don't hire the right person for the right position, this person will not perform. That has to do with the abilities and capabilities and skills that the person has, but most importantly, with the liking of those activities that the person is going to do. There's nothing worse than having a person who hates his or her job to do a task. Okay? So, bear in mind, this is a very powerful sentence, by the way. There are 6 main aspects when we talk about staffing the international organization. The first one is job design. Job design is one of the most complex and time-consuming aspects of human resource management. Why? Because it implies a lot of thinking, it implies a lot of effort, it implies a lot of capabilities of the person who is going to design that job and match it eventually with the person who is going to perform the job. Job design, it's very important in the early stages of human resource planning. Why? Because you need to make sure how many people you need to do certain job. Anyway, we're going to be talking about this in detail. Then comes recruitment. Recruitment is before selection. Recruitment means gathering a pool of candidates who are potentially eligible for the position. Then comes the selection. That's the actual selection process of the best candidate you want. Then induction, which is basically getting the new employee familiar with the organizational culture and the values system of the organization and the organizational climate and everything that has to do with the environment in which this person is going to work. Then the appraisal. Appraisal is basically measuring the performance of the person, and of course the retention. You hire a person with the idea to keep that person and to develop that person further in the organization so that they can contribute to the benefits and the goals of the organization. So we go with the first aspects here. Job design. Job design is the division of work tasks assigned to an individual in an organization that specifies what worker does, how he or she does it, and why. So, here again, what, how, and why. You see how complex it is, okay? And you have to explain the reason why this person does the job. You have to tell in detail how this task has to be done and what exactly has to be done. The why has to do with the goals of the organization. The how has to do with a description of procedures, and the what has to do with what it needs to be done in order to fulfill the required tasks. Effective job design contributes to the achievement of organizational objectives, but also motivation and employee satisfaction. Okay, and this is of course related to the appraisal. The next point here is recruitment. Recruitment is a process of gathering a pool of qualified candidates for a position. So, you go and look for possible candidates to do that job. You gather them together, and of course, the goal is to generate that diverse pool of candidates who are qualified, but most importantly, available for that position. Okay? So, you have job design, then comes recruitment as one of the most important areas of the planning for staffing the international organization. Then comes the selection. Selection happens once the organization has a pool of qualified candidates and it is time to evaluate those candidates. Maybe you've heard about the assessment centers. Those are places in which people are tested in their intellectual capabilities, sometimes physical capabilities, and they're analyzed in a way so that the person who is monitoring this can decide whether they are able to do the job or not. The selection process is also called the hiring process, assesses candidates to determine who ultimately will be hired for that position. So, job design, recruitment, selection. The next point is the induction. Induction involves the orientation and training of the employee in the organizational culture. As I said, it's getting the candidate or the new employee familiar with the culture of the organization, with the climate of the organization, with the value system of the organization. Because you want to have somebody that actually agrees with the values of your organization. Okay? I'll give you an example. If you're a pharmaceutical company that produces abortion pills, okay, that's the business, that's the activity. Well, you need to find candidates who actually agree with your organizational cultures, because part of your organizational culture is producing something that for some people around the world, for some other cultures, might not be appropriate. So you want to hire a person who is okay with the values of your organization. The last thing you want to do is to hire a sales manager who is against abortion to manage a team of people who are going to sell abortion pills. Do you know what I mean? There must be congruence on this. So, as I said, orientation training for the employee in the organizational culture and showing how he or she is interconnected and or interdependent on everyone else in the organization. It is the first step towards gaining an employee's commitment. Of course, that example I gave you, you should know that before you get into the induction phase. But sometimes it happens that you're already in the induction phase and you find out things about people that you didn't know because you didn't ask. Now you have to be careful. How do you ask a person, are you okay with abortion or not? Of course, this is a very controversial topic, but that's a different topic here. Okay. Anyway, the next aspect here is appraisal, which is one step in a holistic integrated performance management system. Just a little part. Appraisal systems can include rating achievement of performance goals as well as demonstrating the job's required levels of knowledge, skills, abilities, and other competencies. So, what's the difference between skills and abilities, by the way? Skills is something that you learn through training. Somebody teaches you how to do it. You didn't have any idea nor any instincts to do that. And abilities are somehow related to something that you can do by nature. Okay, something maybe innate. Okay, there's a slight difference between skills and abilities. The next point is retention. Okay, so we have so far, we have job design, you have recruitment, you have selection, you have retention, you have appraisal, and then retention. Is the organization's ability to keep the employees, to keep them in the organization and keep them happy. Employee retention is usually represented as a percentage. For example, an annual retention rate of 80% indicates an organization kept 80% of its employees in that year and they lost 20%. Of course, it depends on the nature of the job how this rate will change. If you are working in a restaurant and you have a dishwasher, you should know that dishwasher's rate of retention is very, very low. I mean, you have a dishwasher 1 month and the next month another one and the next month another one. So it depends on the type of the job. If we're talking about high level positions like mid management or high level management, of course you want to have a person that stays there as much as possible because they're building their own career in your organization. Okay, or in any organization. There are three types of employees in the literature. Okay, some the so-called host country nationals, the parent country nationals, and the third country nationals. Okay, so host country nationals are those, for example, a US company employing an Australian in Australia. What's the host country? Australia is a host country. So if you hire an Australian, you're hiring a host country national for a US company. Okay? The next one is parent country national. What is this? A US company sends a US citizen to another country for work. For example, if we use the Australian, an American working for an American company in Australia. So the host country is Australia, but the employee is a parent country national because he comes from the same nationality as the company, regardless of where this company is located. And a third country national, well, that's anybody else. A US company hiring a Japanese person for a Singapore plant. Okay? So, and this is quite often the vocabulary that you will find in the literature. Maybe in some of the readings that I posted, you will find this. So it's very important to know that there are three types of employees. And of course, each of them has certain characteristics and they deal with different things inside the organization. We're talking about language differences. Of course, host country nationals normally speak the language of the country, whereas parent country nationals, if we talk about countries like, I don't know, America and Brazil, well, not necessarily that parent country national will know the language of the host country. Okay? Good. Oh, this is very interesting. The approaches to multinational staffing. There are several approaches that companies might take when hiring people. For example, the ethnocentric approach. What is an ethnocentric approach? This approach to staffing results in all key positions in a multinational being filled by parent country nationals. Okay? Why is this called ethnocentric? Why? Because that gives the idea that you are being ethno-cultural by hiring people from your nation into this organization that is located somewhere else. This approach is common for firms in the early stages of internationalization. Why? Because in the beginning, you need to have your own people so that they can teach the people, maybe the local people, how to do a job, and then maybe later on you don't need that and you adopt a different approach. Some of the reasons here that companies will take the approach of ethnocentric, well, the lack of qualified host country national in the host country, and the need to maintain good communication, coordination, and control links with the corporate headquarters. For obvious reasons, you will take an ethnocentric approach. Also, in which cases you take ethnocentric approaches? Well, in the case of, imagine that you have a plant, a factory in a country because it's cheaper to produce there certain kind of components that the company uses for military purposes. Well, that's kind of a very delicate aspect, so you normally will take an ethnocentric approach to send people from your nation because it's about a product that has to do with national security, for example. Okay, that can be the case why some companies will take an ethnocentric approach. The next approach is polycentric. What is this? Well, host country nationals are required to manage subsidiaries in their own country, and parent country nationals occupy positions at corporate headquarters. This is when you hire host country nationals in the host country. You have an American company established in Mexico and you hire Mexicans. Okay? Advantages of this, that employing a host country national eliminates language barriers, avoids adjustment problems for the expatriate managers and their families and adaptations and pre-departure trainings and all these things. And there is no need for expensive cultural awareness training programs. Another advantage, employment of the host country national is less expensive. A lot less expensive sometimes. Especially when you talk about first world countries to emerging economies where, of course, the levels of income and wages and salaries are lower. One of the disadvantages, though, of this type of approach is bridging the gap between the host country subsidiary and the parent country national, right? Those managers at the corporate headquarters, how do you actually bridge that gap? Okay, that can be complicated. The next approach companies might take, is a geocentric approach. This option utilizes the best people for the key jobs throughout the organizations regardless of nationality. So it doesn't matter. You have the best sales manager for your product in Singapore and you transfer this person to the UK. So it's geocentric, okay? It's about geographical location, and you move people around because they have the expertise. Advantages: highly competent employees are available not only at the headquarters but also in the subsidiaries. Okay. Another advantage: international experience is a condition for success in top positions. And of course, there's some disadvantages. Host governments want a high number of their citizens employed and may utilize immigration controls. Yes, some companies, for example, if you open an operation in Nicaragua and you come from Canada, the Nicaraguan government may say, okay, yes, you can open your operations here, your plant, but guess what? At least 51% of your employees have to be people from Nicaragua. Well, that's one of the disadvantages of the geocentric approach, that you cannot actually hire everybody you want. There might be restrictions. Another disadvantage is that this approach can be expensive to implement because of increased training and relocation costs. The next approach is called regiocentric, okay? And this is one way is to divide its operations into geographical regions and transfer staff within these regions. For example, the Asian region, where you only transfer people from Asia. You move people from Malaysia to Singapore to China to Philippines. You do the same in Europe. You transfer your people in Europe from France, Germany, Austria, Ireland. You move them only by regions, or North America or South America. And this approach has the advantage that allows interaction between executives transferred to regional headquarters from subsidiaries in the region and parent country nationals posted to the regional headquarters. Disadvantages: it can produce federalism at a regional rather than a country basis. It only moves the barriers to the regional level. Okay, so we have different approaches here. The first one was ethnocentric approach. Second, polycentric approach. Third is geocentric approach. And the fourth is regiocentric approach. Okay, a philosophy towards staffing. In summary, based on top management attitudes, a multinational can pursue one of several approaches to international staffing, and there are many difficulties in managing a uniform approach to international staffing. As I said, some of these organizations may choose one approach in the beginning and move on to a different approach later on. For instance, a multinational places a high priority on organizational control. Then the ethnocentric policy will be adopted, but only in the beginning. Then they move on to the polycentric approach. Okay, and if the company is very global and very big, they can move on to the geocentric or regiocentric. Well, this is part of the we have a session on expatriation and international assignments. However, that related to the topic of staffing the organization, we can say that there is also some kind of selection process happening when you are transferring people to a different location. Factors that appear to contribute to or provoke the failure of expatriation selection is the length of the assignment. Why? Because it's not the same. If you send a person on assignment for 2 weeks or for 3 months, that's okay, right? It might not be a big deal. But if you send a person for 4 years, and that implies sending the whole family with, that's a different story, okay? So the length of the assignment can contribute to the failure. Then we have willingness to move. There are people who are willing to move, there are people who are not willing to move. Maybe you have the best candidate for an expatriate position, but that person does not want to leave, or has no abilities, or has no emotional capabilities, or has no cultural capabilities to live in a different country. Okay, so willingness to move. And the work environment related aspects. For example, depending on the conditions. If you're, let's say, talk about the mining industry, you're not going to send perhaps a female manager to the mines of the north of Peru, where conditions are extremely hard for a person to do a job far away from family, where only men are working. That has nothing to do with gender discrimination. This has to do with the appropriateness of sending certain people to certain places related to the environment. It can be a dangerous environment, can be an environment that requires a specific physical condition, and so on. So the direct costs associated with the expatriate failure in the case are the airfares. Of course, if you spend air flight tickets for the candidate and the whole family, and then he fails, that's a lot of money gone there. Relocation expenses. This is one of the most expensive aspects of expatriation. That if you fail, or if the company fails, that counts as a lot of money, because relocation implies training, finding place for that person to live, maybe finding the school for children, maybe of course you have to pay the rent of a house, and maybe you have, in some cases you have to provide a car and a driver. Okay. Another aspect here is the salary, and of course the training. Okay. So some of the factors in expatriate selection may include, for example, the technical ability. Is the person able to do the job? Is the person qualified to do the job? Because you may have a person who is willing to go, but that person does not have the abilities. You want to send an expert because that person is able to, fix machines and make important decisions, and has the expertise to do that. So technical ability is number one. But second most important one I wanted to say is cross-cultural suitability. So yes, very important, you have a person that has the ability, but what about the cultural abilities that this person have? Is there compatibility with this culture? Does this person understand the context when it comes to conflict? Okay, we're going to see this in detail. And the point number 3 is the family requirements. What does the family want? Do they want to have a nice house, living in a great neighborhood? What kind of a school for the children, and so on? Another factor to consider is the multinational enterprise requirements. What does the company require as a company? The language requirements and the country cultural requirements. Okay, so we're going to have a look at those in detail. Technical ability. Well, the person's ability to perform the required tasks is an important aspect to consider. Technical and managerial skills are therefore essential. You're not going to send a person that is very interculturally competent to a place that is completely different if the person does not have the technical knowledge. Research findings indicate that multinationals place heavy reliance on relevant technical skills during the expatriate selection process. The second point was cross-cultural suitability. Well, certain traits and characteristics have been identified as predictors of expatriate success. Expatriates require cross-cultural abilities that enable the person to operate in a new environment. Cultural empathy, adaptability, diplomacy, language skills, positive attitude, and emotional stability, among other aspects. The third point here, family requirements. The contribution that the family, especially the spouse, makes to the success of the international assignments is well documented. 75% of the failures of international assignments are because the spouse was not able to adapt to the new environment, whether it's a man or a woman. The adjustment of a spouse has been found to be highly correlated with the adjustment of the expatriate manager in that country or context. The next aspect was country cultural requirements. Some regions and countries are considered hardship postings, remote areas away from major cities or modern facilities, or regions with high physical risk. And this is why I was saying you're not going to send a person that is not, first of all, physically or emotionally strong to face certain physical risk. There may be a reluctance to select females, for example, for certain regions. Indeed, some countries will not issue a working permit for a female. You know, I gave the example of the mining industry because they know it's complicated. So the governments will say, well, sorry, there's no, well, this is discrimination or not, yeah, you can discuss around this. But the reality is that this happens. The next point was multinational enterprise requirements. Well, the mode of operation involved, the duration of the assignment. I need you to be there for 3 months. Okay, can you deal with that? Even with your family? Fine, it's just 3 months. But can you deal with this for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Well, the amount of knowledge transfer inherent in the expatriate's jobs in this foreign operation is another element to consider. And, of course, the language. The ability to speak a second language is an aspect often linked with cross-cultural ability. Differences in languages are recognized as a major barrier to effective cross-cultural communications for obvious reasons. Don't forget that language is a carrier of culture. So if you know the language of the place where you're going, you understand the culture better than if you wouldn't know the language. Isn't that interesting? There is a strong correlation between knowing the language and knowing a culture, and accepting a culture, and understanding a culture. Okay? I can send you to move to move to China for 5 years. And maybe after 5 years you did not learn Chinese, but you were able to succeed in China and you understand the culture. Well, let me tell you that if you spoke Chinese, you can multiply this by 2, 3, or 4 times in the level of understanding the culture of people. Very interesting talk about language, by the way. Okay, so here's a case study. I would like you to pause this for a moment and go to the readings section of the website and download the case study on recruiting a manager for BRB in Israel. Okay? Please read that case. It will take you about 20 minutes or something like this, 25. Make sure you identify any fact that is relevant for the solution of a case. Okay? The idea is to have a debrief afterwards about this. Of course, in a face-to-face class, we do it in a very dynamic way. You guys read the case, we make small groups, and then we have discussions about what's going on. But in this case, what I ask you now is to pause this video now, go and read the case, and come back to the video and continue watching. Okay? So good luck with the reading. So welcome back. I guess you went through the case and were able to underline and identify some of the main facts. And what do we see here? Let me make a small summary of the case. Well, BRB Inc. is a multinational electronics corporation. They plan to establish a new subsidiary in Israel. The firm's base is in Los Angeles, California, with a second overseas headquarters in England. BRB phenomenal growth resulted largely from its ability to enter in the market with new technically advanced products ahead of the competition. Western values, along with the current innovative recruiting strategy practiced in England, would extend to Israel as well. The Israeli venture is the company's first business thrust in the turbulent Middle East. So, here's a summary of the case. Let's imagine you were hired as an external consultant to recommend and perform on an easier, more understandable way of the recruitment process to make the Israeli project a successful one. So in this case, you have 6 candidates. 3 candidates are proposed by the American division, and 3 candidates are proposed by the British. The idea is that you come up with the best candidate for the American and the best candidate for the British. And then once you have each, then we decide who is the best candidate. So here I have some more general information for you. BRB's phenomenal growth resulted largely from, well, I'm basically making a summary again. The technology mainly responsible for BRB's recent growth is a special type of radar signal processing. BRB is small, lightweight, and inexpensive radar systems and so on. And again, I mentioned this in the other slides. I'm sorry about this, but the Western values involved with the current innovative recruiting strategy practiced in England would extend to Israeli as well. So that you saw in the other slide. Anyway, this is what I wanted to show you. We have the first candidate here. Okay, first candidate from the U.S. Division. Well, John was the Vice President of Human Resources in the United States. That's a good point. He worked for BRB for the past 20 years. Well, he started with a degree in engineering and worked in the engineering department. After earning an MBA in Human Resource Management from the UCLA, he transferred to the Human Resource Department. So look at the experience of this person. Vice President 3 years ago. Knew very little about the Israeli culture, but decided to ask different associates who had past dealings with Israel. So here's an interesting point. When you're going to make a selection of who the best candidate is, this is an important point. He knows little about the culture in Israel. Is that an important aspect? How relevant it is? Well, you decide. You will make a decision. So begin his research for candidates within the organization. That was one of the recommendations of the manager. The second option Connors had was to recruit from outside of the company. Okay, and recruit either by contacting an employee agency or by placing and in a Wall Street Journal. Okay, so. John Connors represents the U.S. This person has a lot of experience, of course, in the company. He is inside the company, and he will propose candidates. Okay, so we have the first candidate here. It's Joel Goldberg. Recommendation from the headhunter. That's a good point. 35 years of electronics and radar experience, CEO of Radar Developments Incorporated, a major electronics corporation in New York. Goldberg had taken control for Radar Developments Incorporated in 1981. By 1986, the company had tripled sales and increased profits 5-fold. Studied in Israel, well, that helps. For 2 years after college, spoke fluent Hebrew and was practicing Jew. He wanted to retire in Israel in a few years. Okay, so Our friend John Connors is saying, okay, here's the first candidate from the US division. But there's another candidate, Robert Kyle. He was vice president of BRB Radio Electronics Department, had been with BRB for more than 20 years, and headed two other international divisions for BRB in Japan and Canada. So he has international experience. Familiar with the international process and the BRB corporate culture, one of the most important aspects. Strong management skills, and was highly respected both within the organization and in the industry. He has a PhD from MIT in electrical engineering and an MBA from Dartmouth. He did not speak the language and was not familiar with Israeli attitudes. So again, I mean, he's a good candidate, don't get me wrong, but he lacks language and culture. Might be that it's not so relevant, and then you say, no, I think this is the best candidate because the other reasons. And the third candidate for this U.S. division, from the U.S. division, is Rochelle Cohen. He's Israeli who relocated to the United States in 1982. She originally relocated to assist the head of the electronics division of Yasser Aircraft, an Israeli company that opened its first international office in 1978. Wanted to move back to Israel to be with her family, and she wanted to return to marry and raise a family there. So here we have a candidate, a female candidate, that wants to go back to Israel. She speaks, of course, the language. She knows the culture. She wants to make her lives there. She has experience in international circuit, having worked in the United States, United Kingdom, and Israel. The problems were her young age and her lack of technical expertise and sex, if you want, in a context given in Israel, or at least in the context of a company combined with the nation. Don't forget that we're talking about 1970s, 1980s, and this might have an impact, which is not the reality today. But anyway, Rochelle Cohen. So first female of this pool. So we have three candidates: Joel, Robert, and Rochelle. So you have your notes. You have your in your case study. You make your own notes, and then you're probably making already your decision. But the idea is that we go through this other candidates. So Francis Soleri from the UK has also three candidates. First of all, this guy is Vice President of Human Resource Management in the United Kingdom, reflected on his past 8 years with BRB. While most of Irish business careers in large English firms pick a middle management, O'Leary's actually began at that point. Proved his capabilities through the hard work, constant study, and started ability to judge the character and substance of the people at the first sight. To recruit higher innovation, rotating stock basis, it was this success in hiring innovators that broke him from the shackles of middle management and thrust him to the top of the corporation. Had other success hiring innovations from Israel, enjoyed success in hiring established innovators from Israel, and so on. So this is the guy who represents the HR from the UK perspective. And he's got also three candidates. Michael Flack, who worked for BRB for more than 19 years. And then he graduated from Cambridge College with a degree in general engineering. He joined the company as a mechanical engineer. Initially, he worked in the mechanical design group as a radar division. BRB promoted Flack to engineering section manager, enjoyed various success in radar miniaturization design. During his 11th year, BRB again promoted Flack to the department head in the manufacturing engineering group. 17th year, he became director of engineering design. No international experience, and he was a reputed ticketer. Tremendous spirit with his department, but often resulted in inattention to his administrative responsibilities. So that's Michael, first candidate from the UK. Then we have Yair Shafrir, Vice President of Engineering at Elta Electronics in Israel. Degree in Electrical Engineering from the University of Jerusalem, so we assume he speaks Hebrew and he understands the culture and the context. He spent his professional career in Israel, usually changing companies to accept promotions. He had been with 4 companies since graduating from university 19 years ago. So here's a point to consider. You guys are now thinking about who the best candidate is, okay? Here you have a person that has changed 4 times in the last 19 years, and you want to hire a person for a position and stay there for a long time, okay? So bear in mind, just a little point. He had been able to complete projects on a schedule and within budget over 70% of the time, a rare feat for an Israeli company. No international business experience though, okay? That's a minus for the guy. However, look at the other type of experience he had. And the third candidate of the British division is Harold. Harold is an English citizen of Jewish faith. Attended college in the United States where he earned both bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineers at Georgia Tech. Spent 2 years with General Electric and Vice President of Engineering for Marconi's Air Radio Division. So another well-qualified person. So what I usually do now when we're face-to-face in the class is I let people vote, okay? Vote for the best candidate, and we usually come up with a conclusion. So I don't know what your best candidate is. There's actually no best candidate. I can tell you that in other classes, in other courses, people have chosen Robert Kyle and Michael Flack as good candidates. But as again, it really depends on the mixture of cultures even in each class, because they may have different perspectives. Pretty much all of them have been selected as the number one or the best candidate at some point. Okay, so I don't have any personal preference. I let normally the students decide who the best candidate is, because this is very subjective. Okay, this is very subjective, and of course we need more details, and you need to be familiar with the job of interviewing and looking in the details and etc. But this case study is only to help us illustrate the complexity behind selecting the best candidate for a position, especially in international environment. Okay, so thank you for this exercise. What I have now, it's a small case that I adapted. This is based on a real case, and I usually say this as a story in the class for you to reflect about it. So let's imagine this is a Dutch company whose CEO is called Wouter. He's got 2 subordinates. One of them is John from the United States, and the other one is Elif from Turkey. And the case is about this company that has these salespeople, and having Elif as the best ever sales manager for the company. She has done so much for the company. Her abilities and capabilities and skills are so good that she can get almost any customer she wants, because she knows what to say and she knows what they want to hear, and she has this persuasive way of talking professionally so that she can get pretty much any account. So she's a sales expert. She has a lot of experience. She speaks Turkish, English, French, German, and Portuguese. And the situation is the following. So think about this. Because of these turbulent times of the economy, the company was having problems and they were in risk to even go bankrupt. Unless Elif went to Brazil, and that's why I have the map of Brazil there, to get a potential customer whom they already know, and they know who they are, but it is necessary to go to Brazil and talk to the guy because there is going to be an event next week and she has to be there. So Wouter goes and says, Elif, here's the tickets, please go to Brazil next week and talk to the guy and get him in our company as a customer, because otherwise we don't know what's going to happen. Okay, are you all with me in this case? So she comes in the next day in the company and says, you know what, Wouter, I'm not going to Brazil. And the guy gets in panic and he says, no, Elif, you cannot do this to me. I mean, we have to get this customer. It's very important. It's imperative that you go to Brazil next week. What's the impediment? And she says, well, you know that I married 3 months ago with my husband. He's from Egypt. So we share, religious beliefs. And I promise him that whenever we will marry, I will, somehow go back to my traditions and be what you expected, and so on and so on. Again, this is based on a real case, but I'm adapting the circumstances here. I'm exaggerating a little bit so that you can see the point. So she says, I'm not going basically to Brazil to this assignment because my husband says no. So you can imagine the reaction of the Dutch CEO saying, so excuse me, you're saying you're not going on assignment because your husband says no? He didn't give you permission? That's correct. So here's the thing. I don't know what's going on in your mind now, but some of you may say, what is this? Who does he think he is for not giving permission? And some of you may say, well, they're a couple, they have to discuss it, and of course, has to be an agreement, and of course, they have to get an agreement and discuss. And maybe you are from a culture in which says, well, what's wrong with this? Maybe it's okay, that should be fine. So I don't know what your opinion there is, but the reality is that this is causing a problem to the organization directly in the human resource management, because we have an outsider, which in this case happens to be the husband, who says, no, you don't go. And she says, I don't go because he says I don't go. But what I want you to think about is, what are the solutions for this case? If you are facing this problem and you were asked for your opinion, your advice to give to Wouter, what would you say? Think for a moment. Some of you may say, and I tell you what other students have said, some of you would say, oh, get the husband to go with her. Sure, that's an option. You can do that. You're going to spend a lot of money. And you say, well, yeah, but it's worth it, because if you spend this money, then you get the customer. Well, yes, but what's going to happen in the future when every cultural problem that comes into your organization is going to cost you money just because it's done differently? So some of you may say, bring the husband. But what if the husband says, no, I cannot go because, I don't know, my mother is sick and I have to be close to my mother because that's my culture? Well, some other people will say, well, send her alone. No, because, of course, he said no since the beginning. Or send her with John, the other team member. And the husband says no, because you're not going to go alone with another man. I tell you, this was based on a real case. Or bring the guy from Brazil, some other people would say. Well, guess what? That guy in Brazil is an old guy. He doesn't want to travel. He's afraid of flying, and he doesn't want to move. So she has to go. Of course, I'm pushing you against the wall here. So some of you may already start thinking about, okay, come on. We don't need Elif anymore. Some of you may say, what if we fire her? Some of you may say, no, not fire. Keep her because she has a lot of expertise, but find another solution. Send John with a translator, which is not the best idea, but could be the case. I don't know. There are many possible solutions. I just want you to think about what you would do in that case. Would have been great to see you there live and then discuss further what you think about it, and especially see your cultural differences there. So let's imagine that Elif quit because she decided to be with her husband, and it was enough working there for 5 years. So she leaves the company, and somehow they find a solution to get this customer on board, and then the company goes well again, and then they need to hire again people, and they start getting CVs from people. And imagine that they get a CV of a female candidate from, I don't know, from Turkey again. Oh, sorry, yeah, or Tunisia or Turkey. And wouldn't that come to your mind the experience that you had already? Of course it would. But we're talking about a different issue here now. What if you say, oh, no, 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 another Muslim in this position? No, because we don't want to have the same problem. That would be discrimination. So you see how thin the line is? I was told sometime by a HR manager of a big bank. She said to me, do you know what? Every company discriminates. They just don't say it. Well, this shouldn't be like a nice excuse to accept. But what I'm saying here is that it's impossible that companies will not consider or will not have a look carefully to the CVs because they had a problem before. And in this case was, of course, related to a certain religion. But what if it's related to being from a Latin country, for example? And I put Mexico as an example, which is my own country. So, to what extent some companies are discriminating Mexicans because they don't speak proper English in their companies, or because they have a bad reputation in the society with immigrants and so on? I don't know. You give the case you want. Another activity that I normally do in class is I let you bring in other critical incidents or case studies so that we can discuss further. Okay? So, that was the first case. Interesting, eh? Because human resource management is very complex. Here we talk about culture. Here we talk about assignments, international assignments. Here we talk about recruitment selections. Here we talk about discrimination. All in this small case study. Anyway, I hope this has been illustrative. I have another case study, very small, and this is about Mexico and Germany. Okay, so in this slide you can see the map of Mexico and the map of Germany, which, by the way, are the right proportions of sizes of nations. So you see how different how big Latin American countries can be compared to some European countries, but in terms of the economies, how small some Latin countries can be compared to the developed world. Well, this is a case, I know it very well because I was very related to this at one point as a consultant. In Mexico, normally employees will get maximum 14 days of paid vacation. Yes, it's not very much, especially if you come from Europe, where you get 28 days or sometimes even more. Well, that's not the case in Mexico. In Mexico, you get actually the first year of work, you get only 6 days of holidays, of paid vacation. The second year, you get 8 days. The third year, 10 days, and all the way up to 14. And here's the thing. If you change jobs, you go back to 6. Anyway, so a Mexican manager, middle manager, will get 14 days of paid vacation. But guess what? Siemens in Mexico hires also Germans, not only Mexicans. And Germans are used to have 28 days of vacation, more or less. So what happens when Siemens Mexico hires a parent country national from Germany, who of course wants to have 28 days? You think a German is going to move to Mexico to get 14 days of paid vacation? They're going to say no. So they're going to get 28 days. But what's going to happen with the Mexican who is at the same level of management when he sees that the German is getting 28 days of vacation and he's getting half of it? You see the dilemma here of human resource management. How do you solve this? What do you think it should be the right thing to do? Should you say to the German, sorry, this is Mexico, and this is, by the way, the Mexican law, and it has to be 14 days? Or can you say, okay, all Mexicans who work in Siemens Mexico will get 28 days of paid vacation? Well, one of the reasons why Siemens goes to Mexico is what? Because it's cheaper. Labor is cheaper. So if you're gonna give now to the people the same number of holidays, paid vacation, what's the attractiveness of going there? Especially, we're talking about only holidays. What about salaries? You know, I don't think the German, and this was the reality, will have the same salary as the Mexican exactly at the same position. And you may say, no, of course not, because he's got a German contract. Yes, he's got a German contract, but he's in Mexico. And there's a law in Mexico and the regulations in Mexico. So how do you avoid this unfairness and injustices in the working place? Okay? This is one case, you know, among many, many other cases that I just wanted to use to illustrate how this works. So, we're moving on to the end of this second session. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have retained most of the information. Otherwise, go back and have a look again at the video. And with this lecture, we cover the second session of this course, which is Staffing the International Organization. Thank you very much.